Today marks the second day of inmate voter registration. The IEC and Correctional Services are conducting a 3-day voter registration across the country's correctional service centres. The Commission has appealed to the families of the inmates to bring their identity documents to the various correctional facilities. Correctional Services Minister Ronald Lamola and his deputy are expected to join the IEC at the Kgosi Mampuru prison in Pretoria. Later, the IEC will brief members of the media about the second and final voter registration this weekend. For more, we cross to SABC News reporter Natasha Phiri. Natasha, thanks for joining us this afternoon. What can we expect so far, and perhaps bring us up to speed in terms of developments on your side?
Well, very good afternoon to you, Natasha, and of course to our SABC viewers. Proceedings haven't gotten underway. We as members of the media are actually still outside. Of course, we did see the Deputy Minister actually walking in, Kgosi Mampuru. Of course, my colleague Phimani Balawi had established that the Minister of Correctional Services, Mr. Ronald Lamola, is actually in Groblersdal and would not be making, this inmate voter registration. Of course, his deputy is here. The Commissioner is also here, and of course, the IEC's Chief Electoral Officer, Mr. Kgosi Mampuru, is also here to actually oversee the process. And like you've correctly cited there in your introduction, this is the second day of voter inmate registration. Of course, the final and last day is tomorrow. And this is ahead of the crucial last and final voter registration of the 3rd and the 4th. You would remember that the first was actually last year in November. And of course, the IEC is on a drive to ensure that, South Africans actually come out in their numbers, Natasha, to actually vote. We know that the voters' roll has now jumped up to 26.8 million from 26.3 million before last voter registration. And of course, the aim is that this will go up higher. Now, for South Africans who are wondering, are prisoners actually eligible and allowed to vote? Actually, according to our constitution, it is. And according to the Department of Correctional Services, Natasha, the department is of the view that voting is a fundamental right that should not be denied to any eligible citizen, including those who are currently serving time at its correctional facilities. It would be interesting to know that other countries are not like South Africa. If you're an inmate overseas in countries like the UK, in countries like the US, you're not allowed to vote. But let's just take this conversation further to the National Commissioner of Correctional Services, and this is none other than Mokgethi Thobagale. Mr. Thobagale, thank you so much for joining us on SABC News. So, it's quite an interesting conversation. People were actually surprised that are inmates actually allowed, to vote. And according to the department, this is in line with the constitutional rights extended to inmates, but also your department believes that this provides inmates with the opportunity to register, and this is towards the rehabilitation and community reintegration.
Yes, our constitution as South Africa is one of those constitutions that is rated amongst the best in the whole world. And it's because of the basic human rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. So this exercise is meant to ensure that inmates get an opportunity to vote and exercise their rights. But what is also important is that we are contributing to making them responsible citizens. It is part of their rehabilitation and correctional journey that they have started with us.
Mr. Thobagale, in terms of the stats, I know in 2014 about 19% of the prison population voted. 2019, give us the stats, and how are things going so far over the past 2 days?
Yeah, in 2019, around 15,000 inmates voted. At the statistics as they stand now, there's 139,000 that are eligible to vote. Obviously, we are going to build onto the 15,000 number more or less because, we have movements in and out of correctional facilities. But those that are serving, more than 70% are serving longer sentences. So those that voted in 2019, most of them are still within our centers. Now, what we are focusing on is new registrations. And the projection is that in these 3 days, we should be able to register at least above 20,000. We also want to then take advantage of online registration and continue with the registration after these 3 days. What is important is that we want to increase the numbers. Obviously, 15,000 as compared to an average of around 145,000 is not a good number. We have set ourselves a target of around 100,000.
And are you going towards that target?
Yes, we're going to have to work very hard to get to that target.
You talk about online registrations. Prisoners aren't allowed to have cell phones in prison. What then happens? Do IEC officials actually come with, their facilities, computers, and help the inmates register?
Exactly, that's what we are going to do. We work very closely with the IEC and the Department of Home Affairs, because another determining factor is the availability of the IDs of the inmates. Some of them left their IDs at home, so we are coordinating with family members to bring them through, and then we work with the IEC to register them.
And talking about the influx of the family members, like you've said, you've implored family members to come through with their IDs. I mean, when we were just outside, we saw a lot of people actually come through. Talk us through the influx in these past 2 days.
Well, it's not for us. It's not that much of a security problem. Remember, the inmates are allowed to have visits. So every weekend, we have family members coming. Obviously, they book the visits. So we have a system that is seamless. So we are actually seeing family members actually coming through, and we are very happy with that.
And the voter registration drives in prison, I mean, how has that been? Have prisoners been, compelled to somewhat register to vote? Has there been an interest from prisoners?
There is an interest. It's a voluntary exercise. We don't compel them. We motivate. We explain the importance, and as I've indicated, it's part of a journey of making them responsible citizens. Our own officials have been trained by the IEC. The IEC also comes to help us with voter education, and we will continue. Part of the work that we are doing today actually is to contribute to voter education. The Deputy Minister is here, is going to do the same. I am going to do the same. It's part of making the point that we fulfill our national duty.
Commissioner, thank you so much for your time. Of course, Natasha, that was Commissioner Thobakgale, just also talking to us, about these 3 days of inmate voter registration. Of course, just a reminder to our viewers, if you don't know and you have a loved one, who's actually behind bars, you can actually bring their ID, their identification documents. Tomorrow is, of course, the last day. We will be speaking to the Deputy Minister and, of course, the IEC, the IEC's Chief Electoral Officer, Mr. Mampuru, just to tell us through and talk us through what has been happening over these past few days. But of course, Natasha, later on at 2 p.m, the IEC will also be having a briefing, not only about the inmate voter registration, but of course, you could remember that this past weekend, expats, South Africans who are living abroad, had actually registered to vote in those 101 countries. And of course, the IEC has actually indicated that they've exceeded the number. Remember, the last time we spoke to Commissioner Janet Love last week, Saturday, she had indicated that so far, 18,000 South Africans who are living abroad had actually registered to vote. We do know that that number has well surpassed that figure, around 50,000 South Africans. But of course, the IEC will be confirming those figures later on. We also will be getting an update on the state of readiness for this next voter registration. But of course, the IEC committing there that they want to ensure that many South Africans actually come out in their numbers to actually register to vote this time. And the IEC committing to ensure that this voter registration weekend will be better than the last. You would remember that the last voter registration weekend in November was actually marred by protests in certain areas of Soweto and Mamelodi. And of course, the IEC is working together with the police and joints to ensure that this is not another occurrence this time around. But of course, as SABC News, we are on top of this story, and we will be giving you the latest developments in regards to the inmate voter registration. And of course, this upcoming all-important final and last voter registration weekend. And of course, we do know that the president hasn't announced on the the date of the elections as yet. But of course, when speaking to our political editor Mzandile Mbeje, he tried to put him in a corner about the issue, but the president had said that he would be announcing the date of the elections very soon. But that said, it's back to you in studio.
That's SABC News reporter Natasha Phiri.